Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into Ohio. And let me tell you, the Buckeye State might just be one of the strangest places in America when it comes to folklore and unsolved mysteries. We've got giant snakes attacking children, a mummy that became a tourist attraction for 35 years, cryptids with bulbous heads lurking in the woods, and an unsolved letter-writing campaign that terrorized an entire town. And that's just the beginning. Before we start, I'd love to know something. If you actually live in the USA, which state are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Perhaps you actually live in Ohio and get to experience these mysteries firsthand. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. This video is designed to be your companion for the next hour, something you can relax to, work alongside, or even drift off to as we explore Ohio's strangest tales. So, get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into some truly bizarre folklore together. Chapter 1: The Crosswick Serpent. Let's start with one of the most terrifying stories from Ohio's frontier days, the Crosswick Serpent. This tale takes us back to May of 1882, to a tiny unincorporated community called Crosswick, just outside of Waynesville in Warren County. Today, Crosswick is barely even on the map. It's basically just a few houses scattered along the road, but back in 1882, this quiet little spot became the site of one of the most bizarre creature encounters in Ohio history. So, here's what happened. On a spring afternoon, two young brothers named Ed and Joe Lynch, ages 13 and 11, were doing what kids did back then, fishing in a small creek called Satterthwaite's Run. Now, imagine you're just sitting there with your brother, probably having a great time, and suddenly you hear this weird rustling noise coming from the tall grass behind you. You turn around, and what you see is absolutely the stuff of nightmares. Described as a massive serpent or lizard, somewhere between 12 and 30 feet long, depending on who you ask, though most accounts settle around 12 feet. This thing was black and white with yellow spots, had 4 thick legs with feet about a foot wide, a head that was 16 inches across, and a long forked tongue. Basically, it looked like something that should have been extinct millions of years ago. Now, most kids in this situation would run, and they did try, but here's where it gets truly horrific. The creature was fast, incredibly fast, and it caught Ed. According to the accounts, this monster grabbed the 13-year-old boy in what some reports call its mouth, and others describe as its arms. The details get a bit fuzzy here, and started dragging him toward a huge hollow sycamore tree about 100 yards away. Joe was screaming his head off, naturally, and thank goodness there were some men working nearby. 3 men heard the commotion and came running. There was Reverend Jacob Horn, George Peterson, and Alan Jordan. All 3 of them witnessed the creature. This is important because we're not just talking about 2 scared kids making something up. 3 grown men, including a reverend, saw this thing with their own eyes. When the men arrived, the creature was still holding Ed and was trying to pull him into the hollow tree, which appeared to be its den. The men's arrival scared the creature enough that it finally let go of the boy and scampered deeper into the tree. One of the men scooped up Ed and carried him to safety, while the others ran to Waynesville to fetch Dr. L.C. Lukens. Now, while the good doctor was treating Ed, who was badly bruised, scratched, and traumatized, but alive, the 3 men did what any group of frontier men would do. They gathered a posse. And I'm not talking about a few guys with pitchforks. According to newspaper reports from the time, somewhere between 30 and 60 men showed up armed with axes, clubs, hunting dogs, basically anything they could get their hands on. They marched to that sycamore tree ready for war with whatever demon had just attacked a child. Here's where the story gets even crazier. The posse started hacking at the tree with their axes, figuring the creature would come running out the hole at the bottom. But this thing was smarter than that. Instead, it leaped out from a hole near the top of the tree, landed on the ground, and here's the part that still gives me chills. It stood up on its hind legs, balanced itself with its tail, and took off running like a racehorse across the creek. Some men dove out of the way, others chased after it with their dogs. The creature ran up a small hill, jumped over a fence, and disappeared into a hole under a large rocky ledge about a mile north. Some reports say they even tried to dynamite the cave entrance to trap it inside, though whether that actually happened is disputed. So, what was this thing? Well, researchers have spent years trying to figure that out. The descriptions most closely match a monitor lizard, maybe something like a Komodo dragon or an Australian parenti. But here's the problem. Monitor lizards don't live in Ohio. They never have. And even the largest monitor lizards only grow to about 8 or 10 feet, not the 12 to 30 feet that witnesses reported. Plus, monitor lizards can't really stand and run on their hind legs the way this creature did. Some people think it might have been an escaped pet or circus animal. Back in the 1880s, traveling shows sometimes had exotic animals, and maybe one got loose. But would a tropical lizard survive an Ohio winter? Probably not. What makes this story particularly compelling is the sheer number of credible witnesses. We're talking about a doctor who treated the injured boy and could describe his wounds, a reverend, multiple farmers and workers, and dozens of men who participated in the hunt. The local newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, even reported on it on May 29, 1882. Newspapers back then had to be careful about their reputations. They couldn't just print any wild story without verification, or they'd lose credibility fast. And here's a detail that really makes you think. The Crosswick Monster was sighted near Satterthwaite's Run, which flows directly into the Little Miami River. Fast forward 90 years to 1972, and police officers reported seeing another large reptilian creature in the Little Miami River, just 24 miles downstream. That creature became known as the Loveland Frogman. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe there's something about these waterways that we don't understand. The Crosswick Monster was never seen again after that day in 1882. Either it died in that cave, found its way back to wherever it came from, or maybe, just maybe, it's still out there in some forgotten corner of Ohio's underground river systems. Whatever the truth is, the people of Crosswick certainly believed they encountered something real that day, and the terror on Ed Lynch's face as he nearly became a monster's meal was very, very real. Chapter 2. Sabina's Mummy. All right, from giant lizards to dead bodies. And trust me, this next story is one of the strangest things I've ever researched. Let me ask you a question. If an unidentified person died in your town, what would the authorities do with the body? Today, they'd probably take photos, do DNA tests, maybe put a sketch on the news, and then bury the person after 30 days or so, right? Well, the people of Sabina, Ohio, had a very different idea back in 1929. They decided to just keep the body on display for 35 years. This is the story of Eugene the Mummy, and honestly, it's both heartbreaking and absolutely bizarre. On a hot day in early June 1929, an African-American man was found walking through Sabina, Ohio. He appeared to be very ill, hunched over, barely able to walk. People who saw him said he would occasionally nod or wave, but he clearly wasn't doing well. He made it to the outskirts of town near the intersection of 3C Highway and Borum Road, and that's where he collapsed into a ditch and died, probably from natural causes or illness. The next day, a farmer found the body and called the local funeral director, a man named Littleton. Littleton took the body back to his funeral home, the Littleton Funeral Home, and examined it. The man appeared to be somewhere between 40 and 80 years old. Accounts vary. There were no signs of trauma or foul play. He'd simply died, probably from exhaustion and whatever illness had been plaguing him. Now, here's where things get interesting. The only clue to this man's identity was a small scrap of paper in his pocket with an address written on it, 11 and 18 Yale Avenue in Cincinnati. The local authorities contacted Cincinnati police and asked them to check it out. They did. And guess what? It was a vacant lot, just an empty piece of land. The police asked around the neighborhood, and the man who lived closest to that vacant lot happened to be named Eugene Johnson. So, with no other leads, the authorities decided to call the dead man Eugene. The name stuck. Normally, what happens next is you photograph the body, hold it for 30 days in case someone comes to identify it, and then you bury it in a pauper's grave. But Littleton and the people of Sabina had another idea. They embalmed Eugene, dressed him in a nice suit, and put him on display in a small brick shed right next to the funeral home near a bus stop. The thinking was simple. If people could see him, maybe someone would recognize him and claim the body. 30 days passed. No one came. But did they bury him? Nope. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And Eugene just kept sitting there in that little brick shed, perfectly embalmed, becoming more and more mummified as time went on. Now, you might think people would be horrified by this. Who wants to see a dead body casually displayed in a shed? But apparently, the people of Sabina grew rather fond of their unusual resident. They started calling him their town mascot. He had a couch to rest on. The funeral home staff would dust him off regularly and change his clothes when they got dirty. He even had a little visitor's book where people would sign in to say they'd seen him. Word spread about Eugene. People from neighboring towns started making special trips to Sabina just to see the mummy man. Buses traveling between Columbus and Cincinnati would stop in Sabina to give passengers a chance to stretch their legs and visit Eugene. In 1946, Eugene became such a popular attraction that Littleton actually took him on tour to local festivals, including the famous Circleville Pumpkin Show. Over the 35 years he was on display, it's estimated that 1.5 million people viewed Eugene's body. But here's where it gets darker. Eugene became a target for pranks, especially by local high school and college students. Kids would steal him, move him around, or leave him in weird places. His gold teeth were stolen at some point. Sometimes he'd show up on people's porches on Halloween as a prank. And honestly, while some of this might seem like harmless teen mischief, it's actually pretty disturbing when you think about it. This was a real human being who deserved dignity and a proper burial. The final straw came in 1964. Some college students thought it would be hilarious to steal Eugene, take him all the way to the Ohio State University campus in Columbus, and leave him sitting on a bench on High Street in the middle of the night. Can you imagine being the student who found that the next morning? The authorities called the Littleton Funeral Home and said something like, "Hey, we found your mummy. Want him back?" That incident finally convinced the Littleton family that enough was enough. After 35 years of being a roadside attraction, Eugene needed to be buried. They purchased a plot in the Sabina cemetery, gave him a proper funeral, though not many people attended, and laid him to rest under a large tree. His gravestone is simple. It reads, Eugene, found, dead 1929, buried 1964. Though there's apparently some dispute about whether he was actually found in 1928 or 1929. To this day, people visit Eugene's grave. There are always coins left on top of it, a sign that people still remember him and pay their respects. But his story raises so many questions. Who was he really? Where did he come from? Was he looking for work, as people speculated? Did he have family who wondered what happened to him? And perhaps, most troubling, why did it take 35 years for people to realize that displaying a human body like a carnival attraction was wrong? Eugene's story is a strange mix of small-town hospitality gone wrong, a different era's attitudes toward death and dignity, and a genuine mystery that will probably never be solved. Somewhere out there might still be descendants of Eugene who don't even know what happened to their ancestor. DNA testing could potentially solve the mystery now, but as far as I know, no one has attempted to exhume the body for that purpose. So Eugene remains what he's always been, a mystery wrapped in an odd piece of Ohio history, a reminder of a time when death was viewed very differently than it is today. Chapter 3. Melonheads of Kirtland. All right, let's move from the sad and strange to the downright terrifying. This next story takes us to Lake County, specifically to the woods around Kirtland and Chardon, where one of Ohio's most enduring cryptid legends lurks in the shadows. These creatures are called the Melonheads, and their story is equal parts horror movie and local folklore. So, what exactly are the Melonheads? According to legend, they're small humanoid creatures with abnormally large bulbous heads, hence the name. Descriptions vary, but most accounts describe them as being around 4 to 5 feet tall with deformed hydrocephalic skulls. Some say they're hairless with pale, almost translucent skin. Others mention deformed limbs, razor-sharp teeth, and glowing red eyes. They're usually spotted at night, and they're said to be extremely hostile to outsiders who venture into their territory in the woods around Wisner Road. Now, every good legend has an origin story, and the Melonheads have several versions depending on who's telling it. The most popular version involves a man named Dr. Crow, or Melonhead. The details change, but the basic story goes like this. In one version, Dr. Crow was actually a good man. He ran an orphanage in the Kirtland area and took in children who suffered from hydrocephalus, a condition that causes fluid to build up in the brain, making the skull swell. Dr. Crow and his wife cared for these children the best they could. But when Mrs. Crow died, the grief-stricken doctor struggled to care for the kids alone. Eventually, Dr. Crow himself died, and the orphans were left to fend for themselves. With nowhere else to go, they retreated into the nearby woods, where they learned to survive by hunting and scavenging. Over time, they became feral, distrustful of outsiders, and territorial. But there's a darker version of the story that most people tell. In this version, Dr. Crow wasn't a kind caretaker at all. He was a mad scientist conducting horrific experiments on orphaned children. The story goes that he would inject experimental fluids or venoms into the children's heads, causing their skulls to swell to grotesque proportions. He and his wife abused these children terribly. Eventually, the children had enough. They conspired together, murdered Dr. Crow and his wife, burned down the orphanage, and escaped into the woods where they still roam to this day. There's even a third version that involves government conspiracy. According to this tale, the government was conducting top-secret experiments on children, probably related to chemical weapons or radiation. When the experiments resulted in massive cranial deformities and mental issues, the government quietly shipped these children off to a facility in Kirtland to be cared for by Dr. Crow. After Dr. Crow's death, the children were abandoned, and the government covered up the whole thing. Now, you might be thinking this is just a campfire story to scare teenagers, and maybe it started that way. But here's the thing. People still report seeing the Melonheads even today. The stories are remarkably consistent. Most sightings happen along Wisner Road in Chardon Township and Kirtland, usually at night. One account from a blogger named Jeff B. described how he was 10 years old when he heard his dog barking one night around 10 p.m. He ran outside to see what was wrong and found his dog lying there bleeding. When he looked toward the woods, he saw what he described as a small figure with very pale skin and a large head. When the creature saw him, it ran into the woods. The next morning, Jeff followed tracks that led to a creek before disappearing. Another account from 2001 comes from a man named Tony who was driving down Chillicothe Road in Chardon with his family. They were cruising along at about 45 to 50 miles per hour when they saw something beside the road near an irrigation ditch. Tony described seeing a humanoid figure about 5'7" tall, wearing torn brown pants held together with what looked like corn husks, and a white shirt covered in brown and red stains. The creature's head was swollen and light brown, with 2 holes on the sides where ears should be, and very large eyes. The most disturbing part? It was keeping pace with their car, running alongside them at 45 to 50 miles per hour. When they turned a curve, it jumped into the woods. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of these stories. Some are probably exaggerations or hoaxes, sure. But the consistency of the descriptions, the specific location of the sightings, and the genuine fear in the witnesses' accounts make you wonder. The legend has become such a part of the local culture that filmmaker Eddie Lengyel made a movie about it called The Melonheads, House of Crow, which was released in 2024. When it premiered, entire theaters sold out. People in Kirtland and Chardon take this legend seriously, whether they actually believe it or not. What's interesting is that the Melonhead legend isn't unique to Ohio. Similar stories exist in Michigan and Connecticut, with some variations. This suggests that the legend might have deeper roots, possibly going back to European folklore about deformed, isolated people who lived in the woods. But let's talk about the rational explanations for a moment. Could the Melonheads be based on real people? Hydrocephalus is a real condition, and in the past, people with severe deformities were often hidden away or institutionalized. It's possible that the legend grew from encounters with real individuals who had this condition and lived on the fringes of society. That's actually more tragic than scary when you think about it. Or could it be a case of mass hysteria and urban legend building on itself? Teenagers looking for a thrill go driving down dark roads, their imaginations running wild, and they interpret shadows or animals as something more sinister. Whatever the truth, the Melonheads of Kirtland remain one of Ohio's most persistent cryptid legends. And if you ever find yourself driving down Wisner Road late at night and you see something moving in the woods, something with a head just a little too large, and eyes that seem to glow in your headlights, well, maybe just keep driving. Don't stop for a selfie with a melonhead. Trust me on that one. Chapter 4. Utopia. From creatures in the woods to a town born from dreams of perfection, let's talk about one of Ohio's strangest ghost towns, Utopia. Now, the name alone should tell you something went very wrong here. Anytime someone names a place Utopia, perfect society, things tend to fall apart pretty spectacularly. And boy, did they ever. Utopia is located on the northern bank of the Ohio River in Claremont County, about 30 miles southeast of Cincinnati. If you visit today, you'll find a handful of houses, a tiny general store, and a lot of eerie ruins and history. But what makes Utopia truly unique is that it was the site of not one, not two, but 3 different utopian experiments, all of which failed, and one of which ended in absolute tragedy. Let's start with the first group. In 1844, followers of French philosopher Charles Fourier established a commune in this location. Fourier believed that society should be organized into what he called phalanxes, self-contained communities where everyone lived together, shared all work equally, and split all profits equally. It was basically an early form of communism, though they wouldn't have called it that. The Fourierists built a large 30-room communal brick house and many private dwellings. Families could join the community for $25 a year, which wasn't cheap back then, and in return they'd get a small house and a plot of land. Everything was supposed to be shared and equal. In theory, it sounded great. In practice, it lasted about 2 years. The problem, as it turns out, is that people are individuals with different desires, work ethics, and ideas about how to live. Some people worked hard, others didn't. Some people wanted to keep what they earned. Others resented that mindset. Arguments broke out. Resentments built. By 1846, most of the families had left, disillusioned with the whole experiment. The dream of a perfect society had crashed into the reality of human nature. But the story doesn't end there. In 1847, a man named John O. Wattles, leader of a group of spiritualists, purchased the land and buildings. The spiritualists believed they could communicate with the dead and that spirits guided their decisions. They moved in with grand plans to make the community work where the Fourierists had failed. Now, here's where things get dark. Despite warnings from locals, and this is important, despite warnings, Wattles decided to move the main building, the big communal hall, closer to the Ohio River. Brick by brick, his followers dismantled the structure and rebuilt it right at the water's edge. They completed the move in early December 1847. The locals apparently kept telling them, "Hey, the river floods. This is a bad idea." But Wattles and his followers believed they were guided by spirits, and spirits told them it would be fine. On the night of December 13th, 1847, just days after completing the building's relocation, the spiritualists were holding a dance party in the social hall. Music was playing, people were dancing, everything was great. And then one of the biggest floods of the 19th century hit the Ohio River. The waters rose with terrifying speed. People sought shelter in the very building that had been foolishly relocated right next to the river. The rapidly rising water destroyed the south wall of the building and swept most of the people inside to their deaths. The exact number varies by account, but somewhere between 17 and 20 people drowned that night. Their bodies were washed down the Ohio River. The few survivors abandoned Utopia immediately. You can hardly blame them. But wait, there's more. The land didn't stay empty. In the 1850s, a man named Josiah Warren, who's sometimes called America's first anarchist, tried his own utopian experiment in Utopia. Warren believed in individual rights above all else, no hierarchy, no government control, just people freely associating. He created a system based on labor. You'd pay for goods and services, with time instead of money. It was actually a fascinating idea. But Warren's Utopia ran into problems too. The community's exclusivity made it hard to grow, and neighbors from surrounding towns weren't exactly welcoming to a bunch of anarchists. By the mid-1850s, most of Warren's followers had given up and moved away, frustrated by their inability to expand the community. So, what's left of Utopia today? Not much physically, but oh, the place has a reputation. There are underground ruins near the river, sometimes called the Underground Church, though they're probably just the basement of one of the old buildings. These ruins are said to be haunted by the ghosts of the spiritualists who drowned in the 1847 flood. Locals and paranormal enthusiasts report all kinds of strange phenomena in Utopia, especially on rainy nights. People claim to hear voices, see apparitions, and experience sudden drops in temperature. Some say they've seen dripping wet figures wandering the ruins, the spirits of those who drowned still searching for a way out of the water. There's an old stone house that still stands, and it too is rumored to be haunted. The underground chapel where the spiritualists supposedly held their secret rituals has become a hotspot for ghost hunters and curious teenagers. The place definitely has an eerie atmosphere, whether or not you believe in ghosts. What I find fascinating about Utopia is how it represents the American dream of creating a perfect society and how that dream repeatedly failed in the same location. The Fourierists failed because communal living didn't account for individual human nature. The spiritualists failed because they ignored practical warnings and paid for it with their lives. Warren's anarchists failed because isolation and exclusivity prevented growth. Utopia's story is ultimately a cautionary tale. It reminds us that building a perfect society is impossible because perfection means something different to everyone. It also reminds us that sometimes, when locals warn you that your building is too close to a river that floods, you should probably listen to them, spirits or no spirits. Today, Utopia sits quietly along US Route 52, a footnote in history that most people pass by without noticing. But for those who know the story, it stands as a monument to American idealism, human tragedy, and perhaps, just perhaps, restless spirits who still haven't found peace. Chapter 5. Peninsula Python. All right, from ghost towns to giant snakes, because apparently Ohio had more than one enormous serpent problem. This next story takes us to Peninsula, a small town in the Cuyahoga Valley, and it involves an 18-foot python, mass hysteria, and a legend that's still talked about today. The story begins on June 8, 1944. A farmer named Clarence Mitchell was working his cornfield near Peninsula when he saw something that made him question his sanity. Crawling through his corn was an absolutely massive snake. Not just big, but huge. Mitchell estimated it to be about 18 feet long, dark-colored with brownish blotches. This was not a snake that belonged in Ohio. Mitchell did what anyone would do. He got the heck out of there and immediately reported what he'd seen. Now, in 1944, people took this kind of thing seriously. A few days later, on June 10th, a couple found what appeared to be snake tracks near the Cuyahoga River. The tracks were described as being as wide as an automobile tire. 2 days after that, on June 12th, another farmer found his chicken coop raided. Several chickens were gone, and there were more of those massive snake tracks. By late June, the entire area was in a panic. A large snake, possibly a python or boa constrictor, was loose in the Cuyahoga Valley. On June 25th, a posse of armed men was formed to hunt the creature. They spent several days searching the woods and riverbanks, looking for any sign of this monster snake. What they found was broken branches, disturbed vegetation, and trails that led to the river. But no snake. More sightings came in through July and into August. A woman named Pauline Hopko reported seeing the snake slithering away from a willow tree in her yard. The sight of it terrified her cows so much that they broke loose and ran away. Other residents reported seeing a massive serpent either in the water or moving through the underbrush. So where did this snake come from? The most popular theory at the time was that it had escaped from a circus or traveling show. Remember, this was 1944, and circuses would travel around with exotic animals. It's entirely possible that a truck or train carrying such a snake had an accident in the area, and the creature escaped into the wild. That would certainly explain where an 18-foot python came from. But here's the problem. Pythons are tropical snakes. They need warm temperatures to survive. Ohio has winters, cold ones. If a python escaped in June of 1944, it would have had maybe 3 or 4 months before temperatures dropped, and it would likely have died. So, either the snake died that first winter, or there's more to the story. By the fall of 1944, sightings of the Peninsula Python had stopped. Most people assumed the snake had either crawled into a hole somewhere and died, or had been killed by the approaching cold weather. Case closed, right? Not quite. Decades later, the Peninsula Python legend got mixed up with another local legend called Helltown. Now, Helltown is a whole other story. It's basically the nickname for an area in Boston Township that was purchased by the government in the 1970s to create what's now Cuyahoga Valley National Park. The government used eminent domain to force residents out of their homes. Houses were boarded up, roads were closed, and the area became abandoned. Naturally, urban legends grew around this abandoned town. People claimed it was evacuated because of a chemical spill. Others said there were satanic cults performing rituals in the abandoned buildings, and somehow the Peninsula Python got woven into the Helltown mythology. The legend evolved. Now, people claimed the snake had been exposed to toxic waste from a chemical dump in the area and had mutated into a monster, growing even larger and becoming more aggressive. Some versions of the legend claim the python now feeds on the deformed humanoids, possibly melonheads, that roam the Helltown woods. Other versions say it's grown to 30 feet or more, feeding on toxic waste and anything else it can find. The whole thing became this wild tapestry of different legends all mashed together. Now, let's talk about the reality for a moment. The 1944 sightings were real. They were reported in newspapers. Multiple witnesses came forward. Clarence Mitchell, Pauline Hopko, and others genuinely saw something. Whether it was actually 18 feet long or closer to 10 or 12 feet is debatable. People tend to overestimate sizes when they're scared. That's human nature. Was it a python? Possibly. Was it an escaped pet or circus animal? That's the most likely explanation. Large snakes do escape from captivity, sometimes even today. In 1944, regulations on exotic animals were much more lax than they are now. Someone could have had a large constrictor, failed to properly secure it, and it escaped. Could it have survived an Ohio winter? That's the big question. Probably not, unless it found an unusually warm den or cave system. But nature is full of surprises. There have been cases of tropical reptiles surviving in places they shouldn't. What's really interesting is how the Peninsula Python became a cultural fixture in the area. Today, Peninsula celebrates Python Day every year, a fun festival celebrating the town's claim to fame. There's a parade led by a 100-foot inflatable python. Local businesses decorate with snake-themed decorations. The Peninsula Library and Historical Society shares information about the legend. It's all in good fun. The Peninsula Python also became part of the broader Ohio cryptid community. When you start looking into Ohio's monster legends, you'll find the Peninsula Python often mentioned alongside creatures like the Grassman, Ohio's version of Bigfoot, the Loveland Frogman, and of course, the Melonheads. So, what's the truth? Did an 18-foot python really terrorize Peninsula in 1944? Almost certainly yes, something was there. Multiple credible witnesses, physical evidence in the form of tracks, and dead chickens, and newspaper coverage all point to a real animal. Was it exactly 18 feet? Maybe, maybe not. Did it mutate and become a 30-foot toxic waste monster? No, that's where folklore takes over from reality. The Peninsula Python is a perfect example of how a real event, a genuinely escaped exotic snake, can transform over decades into something much more mythical. It's a reminder that sometimes folklore has roots in actual events, even if those events get exaggerated over time. And it shows how communities can embrace their weird history and turn it into something fun and memorable. Chapter 6. The Hollow Earth Monument. All right, this next one is absolutely wild. We're heading to Hamilton, Ohio to visit one of the strangest roadside monuments in America, a memorial to a man who was absolutely convinced that the earth is hollow and that there are giant holes at the North and South Poles that lead to an inner world. This is the story of Captain John Cleves Sims Jr. and his hollow earth theory. Now, Sims wasn't just some random person spouting crazy theories. He was a decorated war hero. He fought in the War of 1812 and rose to the rank of captain. He performed brave acts at the battles of Lundy's Lane and the sortie from Fort Erie. After the war, people respected him. He had credibility. But in 1818, Sims unveiled a theory that would make him either famous or infamous, depending on who you ask. He declared that the earth is hollow. Not just hollow, but composed of multiple hollow concentric spheres, like layers of an onion, with habitable land on both the outside and inside of each sphere. And here's the kicker. He claimed there were massive openings at the North and South Poles, later called Sims Holes, that would allow access to these inner worlds. Now, before you laugh, remember that this was 1818. Scientific understanding of the Earth's composition was still developing. Antarctica hadn't even been fully explored yet. The idea of a hollow Earth wasn't quite as ridiculous then as it sounds now. Sims presented his theory with maps, calculations, and magnetic field research. He claimed that magnetic anomalies near the poles were evidence of these massive openings. Sims became convinced of his theory, almost obsessed with it. He began a lecture tour across the United States, promoting the hollow earth theory and trying to drum up support for an expedition to find one of these polar openings. And here's what's amazing. People believed him. Not everyone, obviously, but enough people that he gained a significant following. Sims actually got close, very close, to getting government funding for a polar expedition. He petitioned Congress multiple times. During President John Quincy Adams' administration in the 1820s, it looked like funding might actually be approved. Congress was genuinely considering giving this man money to sail to Antarctica and look for a giant hole in the earth. But then Adams lost his re-election bid in 1828 to Andrew Jackson, and Jackson promptly killed the idea. No hollow earth expedition for you. The rejection and years of exhausting lecture tours took their toll on Sims. He retired to Hamilton, Ohio, where his health continued to decline. On May 29, 1829, John Cleves Sims Jr. died, still believing that the earth was hollow, still convinced that he'd been right all along. Sims was buried in what was then Hamilton's Pioneer Cemetery, a place called Ludlow Park. When a new cemetery, Greenwood Cemetery, was built in 1848, most of the bodies from the old cemetery were moved. But Simes stayed put. His body was never relocated. In 1873, Simes' son, Americana, decided to erect a monument over his father's grave. And what a monument it is. At the top sits a sphere, a representation of the hollow earth, with a visible hole running through its center. Below that is a stone pedestal with plaques explaining Sims' theory. The inscription includes his famous declaration, "I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within." The monument stood alone for many years and became a bit of a tourist attraction. People would visit to see this odd memorial to a man with an even odder theory. Over time, the monument suffered damage. It was shot at, hit with baseball bats, and the globe on top was even stolen in 1882, though it was recovered in a neighbor's yard. In 1991, the town of Hamilton decided to restore and preserve the monument. They hoisted the entire structure onto a new cement column, added new bronze plaques to replace the weathered inscriptions, and enclosed it in a protective iron fence. Today, the monument still stands in what's now a playground in Sims Park, surrounded by that fence because, well, it's in a rougher neighborhood and vandalism is a concern. The monument has become a quirky piece of Ohio roadside Americana. People visit it, take photos, and marvel at this remnant of a different era's scientific imagination. Because here's the thing. While we know now that the Earth is not hollow, Sims's theory wasn't completely insane for his time. It was creative. It attempted to explain phenomena he'd observed, and it was presented with genuine conviction. Sims wasn't a con artist. He truly believed what he was saying, and his influence extended beyond his own life. One of his followers, Cyrus Teed, modified the hollow Earth theory into an inside-out Earth theory, claiming we actually live on the inside of a hollow sphere. Teed founded a religious community based on this idea in Estero, Florida, and there's now a state park dedicated to him. Another follower, Jeremiah Reynolds, actually did manage to get himself on a ship to Antarctica in search of one of Sims's holes. He didn't find it, obviously, but his expedition did contribute to legitimate scientific exploration of the Antarctic region. The hollow Earth theory has also had a surprising influence on fiction. Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, published in 1864, almost certainly drew inspiration from hollow Earth ideas. The concept pops up in various forms in science fiction and fantasy, even today. Standing in front of the hollow Earth monument today, you can't help but feel a mixture of amusement and admiration. Amusement because the theory is obviously wrong, but admiration for a man who had a wild idea, pursued it with passion, and almost convinced the United States government to fund a polar expedition based on it. The monument serves as a reminder that science progresses through bold ideas, even wrong ones. It reminds us that curiosity and imagination drove people to explore the unknown long before we had all the answers. And it's a testament to the fact that Ohio embraces its weirdness, preserving a monument to a discredited theory simply because it's part of their history. Chapter 7. Circleville Letters, Unsolved Crime. All right, folks, buckle up for this next one because we're diving into one of Ohio's most unsettling unsolved mysteries. This is a story about anonymous letters, threats, accusations, death, and a mystery that's haunted Circleville, Ohio for nearly 50 years. This is the story of the Circleville letter writer. Circleville is a small town about 25 miles south of Columbus, with a current population of around 14,000 people. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else's business, or at least they think they do. It's known for its annual pumpkin show, charming downtown, and being a fairly peaceful Midwestern community. At least, It was until 1976. In the summer of 1976, a woman named Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver for the Westfall School District, received a letter in the mail. It was postmarked in Columbus, had no return address, and contained no signature. The letter accused Mary of having an affair with the school superintendent, Gordon Massey. It was crude, threatening, and terrifying. The writer claimed to know where Mary lived, said they'd been watching her house, and knew she had children. Mary kept the letter to herself at first, hoping it was just a one-time thing. But about a week later, she received another similar letter, and then her husband, Ron Gillespie, received one too. This letter told Ron that if he didn't stop his wife's affair, which Mary insisted wasn't happening at that point, his life would be in danger. The letters became more threatening. One warned that if Mary didn't admit to the affair and Ron didn't report it to the school board, the letter writer would broadcast the allegations on CB radios, through posters, on signs, and even on billboards. The letter writer was going to publicly shame them. Mary and Ron were terrified. They told 3 people about the letters: Ron's sister, her husband Paul Freshour, and Paul's sister. And that's when things took a dark turn. August 7, 1977, Ron Gillespie received a phone call at home. According to his children, their father grabbed his gun and left the house, saying he was going to confront the letter writer. Shortly after, Ron's car crashed into a tree. He was found dead behind the wheel with a blood alcohol level of 0.16%, 1.5 times the legal limit for intoxication. 1 bullet had been fired from his gun, though it didn't hit anyone. The death was ruled an accident, but Ron's family didn't buy it. They insisted Ron wasn't a heavy drinker and that something didn't add up. Was he drunk? If so, why? Was he forced off the road? And who called him that night? The sheriff at the time, Dwight Radcliffe, initially seemed to agree there might have been foul play, but then changed his story and maintained it was just an accident. Ron's death didn't stop the letters. In fact, they intensified. Now the letter writer was accusing Sheriff Radcliffe of covering up a murder. Letters started arriving all over Circleville to various residents, accusing them of different transgressions. Embezzlement, domestic violence, affairs, all sorts of personal dirty laundry was being aired by this anonymous writer who seemed to know everyone's secrets. The letters continued for years, hundreds of them. They were postmarked in Columbus, but they targeted people all over central Ohio. The handwriting was meticulous, the details were frighteningly accurate, and the psychological torment was immense. The letter writer clearly had deep knowledge of Circleville residents' private lives. Then on February 7, 1983, things escalated dramatically. Mary Gillespie was driving her school bus route when she saw a sign along the road at the intersection of Scioto Darby Road and 5 Points Pike. The sign made an obscene accusation about her daughter. Mary pulled over and went to tear it down. As she grabbed the sign, she noticed a piece of twine running from the sign to a box. Inside the box was a loaded pistol, rigged to fire when the sign was moved. Mary barely escaped injury. If the booby trap had worked properly, she would have been shot, possibly killed. The police investigated the gun and were able to trace a serial number. The gun belonged to Paul Freshour, Ron Gillespie's brother-in-law. Paul's wife, Karen Sue Freshour, who was going through a contentious divorce with Paul, told police that Paul had written the letters. She'd found letters hidden throughout their house. Paul denied everything. He claimed the gun had been stolen weeks earlier, but police gave him a polygraph test, which he reportedly failed. Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder. In 1984, he was convicted and sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison. Everyone assumed that with Paul locked up, the letters would finally stop. They didn't. Letters continued to arrive in mailboxes all over central Ohio. They were postmarked in Columbus, even though Paul was imprisoned in Lima, Ohio, on the other side of the state. The warden at the prison was so convinced that Paul wasn't writing the letters that he placed Paul in solitary confinement multiple times and conducted full-scale investigations. Nothing was found. No evidence that Paul was somehow smuggling letters out. In 1993, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries came to Circleville to investigate. They even received their own threatening letter warning them not to come. The letter said, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you sickos will pay." Paul Freshour, who had just been released on parole in 1994, begged the show to reopen the investigation. He maintained his innocence until his death in 2012. Here's where it gets complicated. Recent investigations, including one by CBS's 48 Hours in 2024, have uncovered some interesting details. A forensic document expert named Beverly East analyzed the letters and compared them to Paul's handwriting. She pointed out that the letter G in both the anonymous letters and Paul's writing was written in a very unique way, almost like the number 6. East says she's convinced Paul wrote at least some of the letters, but other experts disagree. FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole examined the case and said the psychological profile of the letter writer doesn't match Paul's personality. Plus, there's the undeniable fact that letters continued while Paul was in prison under intense scrutiny. Some investigators now believe there were multiple letter writers. One theory suggests that Karen Sue Freshour, Paul's ex-wife, wrote some or all of the letters and framed Paul by planting the gun. Others think the school superintendent's son might have been involved. Some even suspect Sheriff Radcliffe himself, noting that the letters were written in a style sometimes used in police reports, and that Radcliffe would have had access to information about everyone in town. Here's the truly eerie part. The last known Circleville letter was sent in 1994, the same year Paul Freshour was released from prison. If Paul didn't write them, did the real writer stop because they'd accomplished their goal of destroying Paul's life? Or did they stop because they died? The Circleville Letters case remains officially unsolved. We may never know who really wrote those letters or why. What we do know is that for nearly 20 years, an anonymous letter writer terrorized an entire community, destroyed lives, possibly caused at least one death, and then vanished. This case is a chilling reminder of how psychological warfare can be just as devastating as physical violence. Words on paper ruined reputations, ended marriages, drove people out of town, and left scars that still haven't healed. Circleville has tried to move on, but the legacy of those letters still haunts the town. Chapter 8. The Minerva Monster. All right, let's end this journey through Ohio's weird folklore with one of the most famous cryptid sightings in the state's history, the Minerva Monster. This is Ohio's Bigfoot story, and unlike a lot of Bigfoot tales, this one has multiple credible witnesses, police involvement, and documentation that makes it pretty hard to dismiss. Minerva is a small town in Stark County, Ohio, population under 4,000 people. It's located in Paris Township, and back in August of 1978, it became ground zero for one of the most investigated Bigfoot incidents in American history. The story centers around the Caton family. Herbert Caton, his wife Evelyn, and their children lived on Lincoln Street SE, about 2 miles west of Minerva proper. Behind their house was an old abandoned strip mine, basically a large pit that had been dug out decades earlier and left to fill with water and vegetation. In early August 1978, Herbert Caton had been clearing some brush near this pit and had thrown some garbage into it. A few nights later, on August 21st, the Catons' grandchildren and some of their friends were playing outside when they came running into the house, absolutely terrified. They claimed they'd seen a huge, hairy monster rummaging around in the pit. Now, the adults initially thought the kids were just being dramatic or had seen a bear or a homeless person, but the children were genuinely traumatized. So that evening, the family kept watch, and then they saw it. Multiple members of the Caton family described seeing a large bipedal creature covered in dark hair standing somewhere between 7 and 9 feet tall. The thing had broad shoulders, long arms, and what really freaked everyone out were its eyes. The witnesses described the eyes as reddish or glowing when light hit them, the way animal eyes reflect light at night. The creature didn't just appear once. Over the next several nights, it kept coming back. On August 22nd, the family heard loud noises outside. They looked out to see the creature again, this time closer to the house. It appeared to be peering in through their kitchen window. The creature was so close that they could see details: the matted fur, the massive build, the way it moved. Now here's what separates this case from a lot of Bigfoot stories. The Catons did what you're supposed to do when you see something you can't explain. They called the police. Stark County Sheriff's deputies, including Deputy James Shannon, responded to the calls. The deputies didn't just dismiss this as crazy talk. They actually investigated. They found large three-toed tracks in the soft ground near the pit. The tracks were huge, much larger than a human foot, and not consistent with any known animal in Ohio. Deputy Shannon made plaster casts of some of these footprints. The local newspaper, the Akron Beacon Journal, sent reporter Barbara Galloway to cover the story. She interviewed the family and other witnesses. This wasn't just a case of an isolated family making something up. The story was being taken seriously by law enforcement and media. As word spread, more witnesses came forward. On August 29th, a woman named Pauline Hopko, who lived nearby, reported seeing what looked like a hairy ape-like creature moving around the strip mine area. On September 8th, a Mrs. Ackerman reported seeing 2 of these creatures near the mine at around 6 p.m. in the evening, not even at night. She watched them for several minutes before they disappeared into the woods. The Catons' home became a circus, and not in a good way. Hundreds of people showed up, parking on their street, trampling their property, all trying to get a glimpse of the monster. The family had to put up no trespassing signs and fences to keep the crowds away. Some people were supportive and curious. Others were skeptical and cruel. The harassment got so bad that when the Caton family attended a local high school football game, the crowd stood up and started chanting, "Bigfoot! Bigfoot!" as they entered the stadium. It was humiliating. Herbert Caton later said that there were doubters, people who yelled things from car windows when they passed, and it was weird. But he also said that if people didn't want to believe them, they didn't have to. Researchers from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization arrived on September 9th, led by a man named Jim Rastetter. He interviewed the Catons and other witnesses, documented the tracks, and tried to find physical evidence. He returned on September 30th for a follow-up investigation. Over the years, various researchers have re-interviewed the Caton family. What's remarkable is that their story never changed. Decades later, family members who witnessed the creature told the same story, practically word for word. If you're making something up, It's hard to keep the details consistent for that long. So, what was the Minerva Monster? Well, there are a few theories. The skeptical explanation is that it was a case of misidentification, possibly a bear standing on its hind legs or a large person in dark clothing. But the witnesses insisted this was neither a bear nor a person. The size, the way it moved, the proportions, nothing matched. The creature was never photographed or captured, which skeptics point to as evidence it wasn't real. But absence of proof isn't proof of absence, as they say. The Cuyahoga Valley, where Minerva is located, has dense forests, abandoned strip mines, and plenty of places for a large creature to hide if it wanted to avoid humans. What makes this case particularly compelling is the number of independent witnesses who had nothing to gain by coming forward. The Catons were harassed and mocked for their story. Other witnesses faced similar ridicule. These weren't people seeking fame or money. They were regular folks who saw something that scared them and tried to report it. In 2015, filmmaker Seth Breedlove produced a documentary called Minerva Monster that explores this case in detail. The documentary features interviews with Hal Caton, who was there during the sightings, Barbara Galloway, the journalist who covered it, and Deputy Shannon, the officer who investigated. The film doesn't try to prove or disprove the existence of Bigfoot. It simply presents the story as those who lived it remember it. The Minerva Monster case remains one of the top Bigfoot sightings in Ohio based on credibility. When researchers rank Ohio's most believable cryptid encounters, Minerva is consistently in the top 3. And here's something interesting. Bigfoot sightings in Ohio aren't rare. The state ranks 4th nationally in documented Bigfoot encounters, with over 330 reports according to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. Ohio's creature is sometimes called the Grassman, and sightings cluster in the southeastern part of the state, particularly in the Sasquatch Triangle formed by Guernsey, Noble, and Washington counties. So did the Caton family really see a Bigfoot in 1978? We'll probably never know for certain. What we do know is that something scared multiple people, left unexplained tracks, and created a legend that's endured for over 45 years. Whether that something was an unknown primate, a misidentified bear, or something else entirely, the Minerva Monster remains one of Ohio's most enduring mysteries. And there you have it, folks. Ohio State's weirdest folklore explained. From the Crosswick Serpent attacking children in 1882 to Eugene the Mummy, displayed for 35 years, from the Melonheads lurking in the woods around Kirtland to the doomed utopian town that drowned in a flood. We've covered the Peninsula Python, the Hollow Earth Monument, the terrifying Circleville Letters, and the Minerva Monster. What strikes me about all these stories is how they reveal something fundamental about human nature. We're storytellers. We take real events, unexplained phenomena, and our deepest fears, and we weave them into legends that get passed down through generations. Some of these stories, like the Crosswick Serpent and the Minerva Monster, probably have roots in real encounters with something unusual. Others, like the Melonheads, might be urban legends built on misunderstanding and fear of the unknown. But whether these stories are true, partially true, or complete fiction, they matter because they're part of Ohio's cultural identity. They're the campfire tales that parents tell their kids, the local legends that make a town unique, the mysteries that keep us asking questions about the world around us. So, the next time you're driving through Ohio, maybe take a detour. Visit Eugene's grave in Sabina. Drive down Wisner Road in Kirtland at night, though maybe keep your doors locked. Check out the Hollow Earth Monument in Hamilton. And if you're feeling really brave, Visit Utopia on a rainy night and listen for the voices of those who drowned in 1847. Thanks for watching, everyone.